Come here, boy, let's see what you've got. The words cut through the gala like a whip, sharp and loud, leaving a trail of laughter in their wake. Crystal chandeliers trembled above, reflecting gold and glass across the polished marble floors. Champagne flutes clinked nervously as eyes turned toward the sudden command. Carrying a silver tray, he froze for a heartbeat. A drop of wine had spilled moments ago, unnoticed, yet now the entire room seemed to notice it. He was small, barely taller than the tray in his hands, the janitor's son who cleaned floors and served drinks. His fingers shook slightly as he straightened the tray, avoiding every gaze, silent as a shadow slipping past the glittering crowd. The millionaire leaned back in his gilded chair, diamond cufflinks catching the light, and smirked. "Is this the genius they talk about?" His voice dripped with mockery. Laughter rippled through the guests like a wave, some leaning closer to see the boy's reaction. He lowered his eyes, taking a step back. His heart pounded, yet his breathing stayed steady, controlled. He said nothing, keeping his silence as armor. The crowd leaned in, sensing the tension, whispering, nudging one another, curious if the boy would crumble. A child's voice piped up from the corner. "Can he really play chess?" The millionaire's eyes flashed with amusement. "Oh, he can play," he said, voice thick with sarcasm. "But can he survive this room full of real brains and real money?" He gestured dramatically toward the board, slamming a pawn down with a clang that echoed across the hall. "Show us, boy, or are you scared?" The underdog's hand tightened around the tray. "I'm working," he said quietly, his voice steady, refusing to rise to the bait. He shifted slightly, backing away, eyes downcast, posture calm despite the storm around him. The words were soft, but they carried weight, a subtle defiance wrapped in humility. Laughter grew louder, more mocking. A few guests leaned over to encourage the millionaire. "Make him play, let's see the talent." The millionaire's grin widened, teeth glinting. "A challenge, then," he said, voice sweet but lethal. "Your reputation, your dignity, maybe even your pride is at stake. Let's see if you're worth a second glance or just another joke." He waved toward the ornate chessboard at the center of the room. The boy's hands remained at his sides. He didn't argue. He didn't protest. He just stood there, silent, the calm in the hurricane of jewels, champagne, and laughter. A subtle tension hovered around him, an unspoken promise that he might not be as ordinary as the room assumed. Glasses lowered, whispers buzzing, the crowd leaning in closer. The millionaire's eyes narrowed, sparkling with impatience and cruelty. With a sharp motion, he slammed a pawn onto the board again, louder this time, the sound punctuating the air. "Fine. If you're scared, say it now." The underdog didn't answer. He didn't flinch. Silence fell like a heavy curtain across the room, hanging between mockery and disbelief, curiosity and suspense. For a moment, the crowd paused, the laughter dying on their lips, all eyes fixed on the quiet figure who refused to react. Something in that silence unsettled them. Something that made the millionaire lean forward just slightly, a hint of unease flickering behind the arrogance. The boy was still, but the air around him seemed charged, ready to explode. The pawn gleamed under the chandeliers. The room held its breath, and for the first time that night, no one laughed. "You'll regret standing there." The words cut sharp, sharper than any slap. The millionaire's voice sliced the glittering air, dripping with menace and amusement. Crystal chandeliers shook ever so slightly, and a glass of champagne trembled in a guest's hand, spilling a drop that hung like a jewel on the edge. The boy hesitated. Every eye in the room was now a spotlight, laughter circling him like a cage. The crowd leaned in, whispering, nudging one another, some pointing, some chuckling nervously. He lowered his gaze, hand brushing against the table edge, posture calm but deliberate, as if he could measure the weight of every second. Finally, he nodded. No words, no flourish, just a quiet acceptance that sent a subtle shock through the room. The laughter faltered for a heartbeat, replaced by murmurs. Was he confident, terrified, or simply unreadable? The uncertainty rippled, pulling attention tighter around him. He approached the board. His fingers hovered over the pieces, adjusting them slightly, almost ritualistically. Eyes scanned the squares with silent calculation. Shoulders squared. He breathed evenly. To the untrained eye, it was a small, quiet motion. But those who knew chess saw it. Posture, focus, micro-adjustments, all hints of a hidden genius quietly awakening. The millionaire clinked his champagne glass loudly, a mocking punctuation. "A true master, huh?" he sneered, slamming his rook down with theatrical flair. Laughter erupted around him again, forced and cruel. He moved with exaggerated arrogance, sweeping the board, showing off wealth, confidence, and contempt all at once. Every gesture screamed, "Look at me, this boy is nothing." The crowd wavered, caught between ridicule and curiosity. Eyes darted between the two, the boy silent and steady, the millionaire loud and reckless. Energy shifted. Mocking whispers softened, replaced by intrigued glances. Something unspoken passed through the room. From the edge, a respected chess coach, a quiet academic known for spotting raw talent, stepped closer. Eyebrows raised slightly, lips pressed in concentration. He didn't speak, but the subtle nod, the pause in his step, added tension. Even an expert could sense the underdog's potential, though the room had yet to see it fully. Silence deepened as the boy lifted a hand, fingers brushing a pawn. He moved it, precise, quiet, deliberate. The pawn landed with a soft click that seemed louder than the millionaire's theatrics. A ripple ran through the crowd, subtle but electric. Eyes widened. Mouths opened, then closed, uncertain. Even the millionaire paused, tilting his head, trying to read the boy's intent. For the first time, arrogance met its match. The game had begun, and in that single, silent move, the rules of the room had already started to change. A pawn to e4. The millionaire laughed, a sharp, polished sound that cut across the gala. "So bold for a janitor's kid," he sneered, leaning back in his chair, diamond cufflinks glinting under the chandelier. Champagne sloshed dangerously in his glass as he gestured for the crowd to lean in. Laughter rippled, cruel and rehearsed. He moved his knight with a flourish, letting it leap like a predator across the board, smirking at the exaggerated gasp that followed. Each bishop slice, each rook advance was a performance meant to intimidate, to humiliate. "Careful, boy, don't let me catch you off guard," he mocked, his voice dripping with false charm. The underdog's hand hovered, steady and deliberate. He didn't flinch. Pawn captured, knight repositioned, every move precise, almost surgical, eyes scanning, calculating not just the board but the man across from him. The millionaire's flamboyance was predictable, too theatrical, too reckless, and he knew exactly how to read it. The crowd started to shift. Laughter faded into quiet murmurs, whispers replaced sneers, glasses lowered. Something subtle had changed. The boy wasn't just surviving the game, he was steering it. For a fleeting second, the underdog's mind drifted, a memory almost too quick to notice. Candlelight flickering in a cramped bedroom, a small, battered chessboard, opponents older, bigger, laughing as he made moves they didn't expect. Sleepless nights spent studying patterns, mastering tricks no one thought a boy from his neighborhood could understand. Those nights, those tiny victories, had trained him for this exact moment. A soft cough from the edge of the room drew him back. The ally leaned forward, eyes narrowing, a whisper cutting through the tension. "Interesting?" Authority noticing, validation, a hint that this wasn't just a child's boldness, it was skill, real skill. The millionaire scowled, sensing the shift. His hands slammed on the table, rattling the pieces. "Is that all you've got?" he barked, voice sharper, mocking. His movements became faster, louder, almost desperate to regain control. "A true master, huh? Let's see you survive this." But the underdog didn't react. Calm, composed, invisible focus hidden behind quiet eyes. The crowd could feel the difference now, laughter no longer filling the air, replaced by tense curiosity. Then came the moment. The underdog's hand moved a pawn forward, a deliberate sacrifice. Simple, clean, but underneath it lay a trap so subtle it could expose the millionaire's biggest oversight. The millionaire glanced, smirk still in place, completely unaware. And that was the pause, that single quiet move, a whisper of danger the crowd hadn't noticed yet. Something was coming, something the millionaire had no idea he had just walked into. The millionaire's grin faltered. "How did you see that?" he demanded, voice tighter than before, eyes scanning the board as if the boy had cheated, conjured some impossible insight. The crowd shifted uneasily, whispers rising like wind through dry leaves. Something had changed, something dangerous. The underdog didn't answer. His fingers hovered over the next piece, steady as a heartbeat. His mind was elsewhere, drifting through memories no one could have guessed. Candlelight spilling across a tiny bedroom. Books stacked precariously on the floor, pages bent, margins scribbled with diagrams. Nights spent alone, listening to the creak of the ceiling fan, plotting moves against shadows he imagined as opponents. The smell of cold ink and chalk dust, the ache in his back from hours bent over a board, the loneliness that taught him patience. Every sacrifice, every small triumph had led him here. He had been a junior champion once, traveling to tournaments he barely understood as a child. A self-taught genius, stripped of fame and recognition, practicing endlessly in silence while the world laughed at his humble beginnings. Every mistake the millionaire expected him to make had already been anticipated. Every trap he could spring had been dismantled before it was even set. Now the underdog's hand moved. A pawn slid across the board with quiet authority, and suddenly the trap snapped. Pieces that once seemed safe were suddenly exposed, a weakness in the millionaire's defenses glaring in the open. The arrogance that had filled the room like smoke began to dissipate. The ally leaned forward, eyes sharp, lips pressed in approval. Just a subtle nod, almost invisible, but the gesture spoke volumes. Recognition from authority, validation that this was no fluke. The crowd noticed. Their whispers grew, curiosity mingled with disbelief, awe threaded through the murmurs. The millionaire's jaw tightened. Fingers drummed against the table, champagne forgotten, smudging the polished surface. He tried to recover, to force a laugh, to mock the move, but it faltered, dying before it left his mouth. Each glance at the board betrayed panic he refused to voice. The underdog's eyes never left the pieces. Calm, unshaken, silent mastery radiating from every subtle motion. The trap had worked, but it was more than a trick, it was a revelation. Every guest now saw the truth in the balance of the game. The underdog wasn't just good, he was extraordinary. The millionaire's hands hovered over the board, seeking an answer, a counter, any move that could salvage pride. But it was too late. The position was fatal. Every line, every square, every option had been anticipated, calculated, controlled. The impossible had become inevitable. The room held its breath. The air thickened with tension. Even the allies' subtle nod could not mask the rising suspense. The crowd leaned forward, glasses lowered, whispers fading into an electric, suspended silence. And in that silence, the underdog's hand poised for the next move. The millionaire realized, only now, that he was completely, undeniably trapped. Sweat gleamed on his diamond cufflinks. And the board was silent. Every eye in the room was fixed on the pieces, the tension slicing through the air like a knife. The millionaire's hands trembled, hovering over a bishop he had once wielded with flamboyant arrogance. His confidence, the kind that had filled the mansion with laughter, now wavered. He could feel it, the weight of every gaze, the stifling scrutiny, the realization that he had misjudged the boy before him. The underdog's fingers hovered briefly over a pawn, then moved with quiet precision. It slid forward, a simple motion, but it unleashed a chain reaction no one could stop. Knights trapped, queens exposed, the entire board bending to a sequence so elegant, so ruthless, it left no room for error. Every piece fell into position as if the board itself recognized the genius behind the moves. Gasps replaced laughter. A few whispers ran through the crowd, tentative at first, then bolder. "Is he really?" Eyes widened as the realization settled in. The ally leaned closer to a colleague, voice low but firm. "He's extraordinary. Watch carefully." The words rippled through the room, lending authority to a truth that everyone could now see with their own eyes. The millionaire tried to mask panic with a forced laugh, but it sounded hollow. His fingers drummed nervously, betraying every ounce of his unease. "Well, perhaps a lucky sequence," he muttered, voice tight, throat dry. But the underdog didn't blink, didn't move more than necessary. Calm radiated from him, unshakable. The contrast was stark, one man consumed by anxiety, the other poised in silent mastery. The crowd leaned forward collectively, breaths held as the underdog continued his methodical advance. He sacrificed a pawn here, repositioned a knight there, all subtle, all precise, a quiet symphony of strategy unfolding. The millionaire's eyes darted desperately across the board, searching for an escape, a flaw he could exploit. But there was none. Every possible path had been accounted for. Every trap he had set had been dismantled before it even existed. A bead of sweat slid down the millionaire's temple. This isn't possible," he stammered, voice cracking slightly. The crowd stirred, some leaning closer, realizing that their amusement had evaporated into awe. Even the journalists stopped tapping cameras, caught in the unfolding revelation. And then, with a simple, deliberate flick of the wrist, the underdog moved his rook. "Checkmate." Silence fell, heavy and complete. Every heartbeat in the room seemed to echo off the chandeliers. The millionaire froze, eyes wide, chest tightening, hands still hovering uselessly over the board. He had been cornered, publicly humiliated, exposed before the very audience he had once commanded with a smirk. No excuse, no charm, no fortune could undo what had just happened. The underdog leaned back slightly, eyes calm, breathing steady. No fanfare, no arrogance, just the quiet power of mastery finally revealed. And the room waited waited for the millionaire's reaction for some spark of defiance, some attempt to reclaim the dignity he had so carelessly flaunted. But in that stillness, the truth was undeniable. The boy, the janitor's son, had won. The air was electric. The stakes, once laughter and social games, had transformed into something far deeper. Respect, awe, and a reversal that no one would forget. And the millionaire, he realized it fully now as every eye bore into him. He had underestimated genius. Completely. Checkmate, the millionaire swallowed hard. No one laughed. The room, once alive with mocking whispers and champagne-fueled bravado, had fallen into stunned silence. Eyes shifted from the trembling millionaire to the calm boy who had just upended the evening's spectacle. Every guest, every camera lens, every whispering voice seemed to hang on the same realization. They had witnessed something extraordinary. The ally stepped forward, voice firm and unmistakable, carrying authority that even the most skeptical could not ignore. That was brilliance, pure, unshakable strategy. You, young man, deserve every opportunity to grow your talent. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in, then added, I would like to offer you a full scholarship to study under my guidance, and access to every tournament and mentor that can sharpen your skills further. The applause was hesitant at first, then swelled like a wave crashing through the gala. Guests who had laughed moments before now rose from their seats, clapping, murmuring, some even wiping astonished tears. The energy had shifted completely, mocking curiosity replaced by admiration, disbelief replaced by respect. The millionaire shifted uncomfortably, gaze darting to the boy and back to the applauding crowd. Well, he began, voice tight, chest rising and falling with tension. I suppose you've earned it. He cleared his throat, trying to mask the tremor, the first visible sign of humility that evening. It was awkward, forced, and yet undeniable. He was conceding to brilliance he had tried to dismiss. The underdog nodded quietly, accepting the recognition without fanfare. He didn't need to boast. The room already understood. Every whisper of struggle, every moment of quiet discipline, every night spent learning in shadows instead of limelight, it all resonated now. His dignity shone, silent but unmissable, as he gathered himself and stepped away from the board. The ally's hand rested lightly on the boy's shoulder, a gesture of mentorship and approval. Remember, he said softly, this is only the beginning. The words carried promise, possibility, and the quiet validation that the underdog's journey was far from over. Guests continued clapping, the energy now celebratory rather than cruel. Cameras captured the moment. Reporters whispered about the boy who had bested the billionaire host, and the once boastful millionaire could do nothing but watch, humbled. As the underdog walked past him, the millionaire adjusted his cufflinks nervously, a self-conscious motion that spoke volumes. He leaned slightly, voice barely audible, almost to himself. Next time, I won't underestimate anyone. The boy kept walking, eyes forward, calm, carrying with him the quiet triumph of skill, patience, and unacknowledged genius finally recognized. And for the first time that evening, the mansion felt less like a playground for arrogance, and more like a stage where true mastery had been seen and respected. The room emptied. Champagne glasses clinked as waiters collected the last remnants of the gala, and the glittering chandeliers reflected empty tables. But the story didn't leave with them. It lingered in the air, whispered in hallways, shared in messages and flashes of social media. The janitor's son had bested the billionaire. By morning, the story was everywhere. Clips of the match circulated online, viewers replaying the boy's calm precision, the millionaire's faltering grin, the final, quiet checkmate. Headlines called him a prodigy, a genius in disguise. Offers arrived, scholarships, mentorship invitations, and personal notes from respected chess coaches. Doors that had once been closed opened slowly but unmistakably. The millionaire sat alone in his study, the clinking of his empty glass echoing against the walls. Pride still lingered, but it had been pierced, tested. He replayed the match in his mind, remembering each trap he had overlooked, each subtle move he had dismissed. His reputation remained, yes, but it now carried a faint shadow, the memory of being bested publicly by someone he underestimated. Across the city, guests of the gala recounted the evening over and over. Did you see how he anticipated that move? Someone whispered in awe. I've never seen anyone that calm under pressure. Every retelling reinforced the underdog's legend, the quiet triumph of skill over arrogance. For the boy, life didn't explode into chaos, but it shifted. He returned to his work, his routine, yet everything felt different. People held doors, offered small nods of respect, invitations to workshops arrived, and his mentor checked in regularly. Each step was a quiet affirmation that his talent mattered not just for himself, but for everyone watching. The allies' approving nods were a reminder. His influence could reach far beyond a single gala, beyond a single moment of victory. And outside, in the distance, a young child lingered on the curb, eyes wide as he watched the world buzzing about the boy who had triumphed. Perhaps this child would grow, inspired by what he had seen, the quiet genius, the calm precision, the reminder that brilliance often hides where no one expects it. The game had ended, yes, but its impact had only just begun. Some victories leave scars, others leave respect. The room had grown quiet again, but this time it wasn't tension or fear that filled the air. It was admiration, subtle and steady, like sunlight spilling across a polished board. The underdog stood at the edge of the room, calm, hands folded, eyes scanning the crowd that had once laughed at him. Now every gaze carried acknowledgement, some silent, some wide-eyed with awe. He had won not with anger, not with showmanship, but with quiet precision, dignity, and skill that spoke louder than any words. The millionaire approached, slow, deliberate. His usual swagger was tempered by hesitation, his diamond cufflinks catching the light like small admissions of humility. "I underestimated you," he said softly, almost to himself. Then louder he addressed the room. "Everyone here has seen something remarkable tonight. I owe you respect." His voice carried a public apology that no one had expected. For the first time, the millionaire extended not mockery, but recognition. There was even the subtle hint of mentorship, an olive branch offered to a boy who had already proven himself. The ally stepped forward, clearing his throat. Genius doesn't demand attention. It doesn't need flash or applause, but it deserves recognition, opportunity, and the chance to inspire. His words landed like a seal on the evening, and the crowd responded with heartfelt applause, not for wealth, not for power, but for talent, resilience, and poise. The underdog's expression didn't change. There was no smugness, no triumphant smirk. He simply nodded, accepting the respect silently, letting the acknowledgement settle around him. Every handshake, every whisper, every glance reinforced the truth that had carried him this far. True greatness shows itself in calm mastery, in humility, in the patience to let skill speak before ego. Guests began to leave, their conversations buzzing with excitement, recounting moves, traps, and the quiet brilliance they had witnessed. But the underdog remained at the edge of the room for a moment longer, watching the millionaire, the ally, the crowd, watching the world shift subtly around him because he had chosen to act with skill and integrity. Then as the lights dimmed, the camera panned down to the chessboard. Pieces stood reset, silent and waiting, as if inviting the next challenger. The underdog walked away calm, his footsteps echoing softly against the marble floor, leaving behind more than a victory. He left a legacy, a reminder that talent, when recognized and respected, could change more than a game. It could change perspectives, inspire courage, and quietly set the stage for the next underdog to rise.